Dear students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today in this module we are going to talk about environmental movements. This is the third part of the modules on environmental movements. Here in this module we are going to talk about Narmada Bachao Andolan. This module narrates the struggle of Narmada Bachao Andolan as an environmental movement in India. Right from independence there were several proposals to harness the waters of the river Narmada. In 1961, Jawaharlal Nehru had laid a foundation stone for a dam near the village called Navagam in Gujarat. In this module, we will engage with the history of the protest movements against Narmada Valley development projects. While the Narmada Bachao Andolan or NBA is believed to be the most talked about resistance movement that challenges large dams, it would be wrong to assume that large dams in India were always celebrated as temples of modern India or modern temples of India and had never met with protests and resistance. Patrick McCulley states in his book in 2001, which is called Silenced Rivers, that Hirakud, the first huge multipurpose dam project completed in the independent India, provoked opposition from local politicians and bureaucrats as well as people to be evicted. McCulley's brief narrative on resistance movements against large dams in India informs readers that around 30,000 people had marched in protest against Hirakud Dam site in 1946. Mentioning another incident, Patrick McCulley reports that in 1970s, some 4,000 people occupied the Pong Dam construction site, demanding resettlement land, and the work was stopped for more than 2 weeks. Unquote. McCulley narrates to us the widespread popular resistance by people affected from large dams in the state of Bihar in late 1970s on the banks of Subarnrekha River. He refers to protest march by affected people numbering around 1 lakh on the site of Chandil Dam. A month after this spectacular mobilization, McCulley reports that police had opened fire at the demonstration by around 8,000 affected people and had killed 3 protesters. In the decade of 1970s, there arose protests against the proposed Tihri Dam in the then Uttar Pradesh on the river Bhagirathi and from the people affected by Chandil and Ichar Dam on Subarnrekha. There were also movements by downstream people affected by construction of Sipu and Dantewada Dam in North Gujarat, led by the Gandhian activists, raising concerns about water scarcity that was being experienced in the downstream region of the large dams. Around 1980s, the earlier romanticism of looking at large dams as temples of modern India was losing its appeal. And as we have discussed while talking about hydroelectric power and large dams, Nehru was a precursor to the critique of large dams as representing disease of gigantism. In addition to that, Gandhian activists such as Jugat Ram Dave, who conceptualized a school and commune at Vedchi in South Gujarat to exhibit Gandhi's idea of Nai Talim, also had started to rethink the earlier impressions on large dams. Way back in late 19th century during the British Raj, the idea of harnessing the water of Narmada rivers had grabbed the attention of colonial irrigation planners. The first irrigation commission of India, which was constituted soon after the devastating famine of the year 1900, mentions a proposal to construct a barrage near Bharuch. However, the soil conditions at the proposed site was found to be unsuitable for flow irrigation and hence the scheme got shelved. The Sardar Sarovar project or Narmada Dam is one of the 30 large dams that were planned to be built on the river Narmada. During the early years of its long history, during 1964 to 65, the rationale used for Sardar Sarovar project height of 530 feet was to prioritize the requirement of irrigation water for arid zones in Gujarat and Rajasthan over the power benefits. However, this proposal of Khosla Commission to allocate 13.9 million acre feet of water to Madhya Pradesh and 10.6 million acre feet of water to Gujarat was not agreeable to upstream riparian states, and the proposal got mired into interstate disputes. So under the Interstate Water Dispute Resolution Act 1956, the government established Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal, and this tribunal got constituted in 1969. After hearing the argument from different riparian states and a non-riparian beneficiary state of Rajasthan that was made party to the proceedings that ran for 10 years, the Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal Award was passed in 1979, apportioning the Narmada waters between 4 states and fixing the height of Sardar Sarovar project at 138.68 meters, that is 455 feet. This Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal award also laid down binding rehabilitation clauses by promising oust is cultivable and irrigable land and alternative housing with civic amenities. While much proverbial water has flowed down the river basin since then, and also through turbines of this power project in the last 1 decade, in writing accounts and narratives about Narmada controversy, authors in recent times slip into the tendency to present the discourse as, quote, minefield, bibliographer's nightmare, voluminous and tendentious, and the stand taken by opponents and proponents as confrontationist or attrition of forces, whereby a middle ground of dialogue and compromise is lost. However, those narratives have seldom tried to probe the responses from the proponents and state, who viewed propaganda, hate speech, and emotive power of thirst aiming at discourse breaking rather than responding to criticism and alternative proposals, such as the one put forward by Joy and Paranjpe in the book in 1995, Making Sada Sarovar Project a Viable Project, in discursive fashion. Many a times, such narratives are also seen faltering at the review of literature chapter itself. So, for example, in a book called The Politics of Water Resource Development in India, the Narmada Dam Controversy, that was written by a renowned political scientist called John R. Wood, narration of the Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal years are presented with singular focus on how different state governments and opposition parties in state level politics perceived and participated in the process. However, Wood neglects to draw upon the Vidhan Sabha resolution dated November 24, 1967, and letters sent by Madhya Pradesh members of parliament to the then Prime Minister on December 16, 1967. Wood says, and I quote, periodically the tribunal and its assessors toured the disputant states to investigate. They made a point not to meet politicians. They did not hold public hearings. Hearings and consultations had never been held before, nor remarkably were they asked during 1969 to 1978. But Wood fails to draw from the petitions submitted by Narmada Bachao Samiti to the chairman of Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal dated October 28, 1974. Sanjay Sangwai, correcting the record, says how there were widespread protests during the visits of Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal assessors to Nimad region, drawing upon news clips from the Indore edition of two newspapers, Sandesh and Nai Duniya. John Wood says, and I quote, fairness in Wood's eyes was a question rarely asked in 1969 to 1978. There was some grumbling on both sides, unquote. While John R. Wood ignores to narrate immediate response to Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal Awards announcement on August 18, 1978 in the form of 10,000 people taking out a protest rally in Badwani and 5,000 farmers from Nimad taking part in protest demonstrations in Bhopal on 23rd and 28th August respectively. Sanjay Khagram, in his book that got published in 2002, not only describes the protests that followed Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal Awards announcement, but also reviews events that took place between 1978 and 1981, drawing upon news clips from Bhopal edition of the Statesman and the Times of India. Isn't it surprising that an academician whose, I quote, news clipping files on Narmada and Indian water resources development now go back to 30 years and fill many feet of filing cabinet space, unquote, shouldn't have picked up clips from the Indore and Bhopal editions of the newspaper Times of India, because all that John R. Wood keeps quoting in that 2002 book is Ahmedabad edition of the Times of India. While writing about NWD process, and John R. Wood had ignored two books on the subject that have been in public domain for many years before the publication of his book. Sanjay Sangwai and Sanjeev Khagram engages with the first phase of resistance against the large dam under the banner Narmada Bachao Andolan, which couldn't sustain the mobilization beyond initial few years. Let's talk about Narmada Valley development projects and the consolidation of resistance against these proposals of large dams. The full details of Narmada Valley development project started to emerge only towards mid-1980s, when an ambitious plan to construct 30 large dams, 135 medium dams and 3,000 smaller dams across the Narmada Valley started getting announced. The next prominent event was the World Bank decision in 1985 to provide US $450 million loan to finance the construction of dam and canal network. The Planning Commission accorded investment approval to the project in October 1988 for rupees 6,406.04 crores at 1987 price levels. Environmental clearance was denied to the project in the year 1983, but after considerable correspondence between Union Ministry of Water Resources and Ministry of Environment and Forest, the conditional environment clearance was accorded to the project on June 24, 1987. Narrating the history of the second phase of resistance, where people got mobilized with a view to seek full information about the extent of submergence and displacement to be faced by affected villagers and promised rehabilitation, Macaulay states, and I quote, Medha Patkar was a 30-year-old social activist when she first came to Narmada Valley in 1985 to work in the villages to be submerged by the Sardar Sarovar Dam. Over the next few years, Patkar traveled by foot, bus and boat throughout the nearly 200-kilometer long submergence zone, which includes parts of 3 states and people speaking 5 different languages. Patkar lived with the villagers to be displaced, listened to their fears for the future, and urged them to organize to force the government to respect their rights. Her oratorial and organizational skills helped build the trust of many local people and also attracted a committed coterie of young outside activists to come to the valley. These activists, who included engineers, social workers, and journalists, were to play a vital role in the forging of Narmada Bachao Andolan. Unquote. During those initial years, there were different formations that had started to emerge with a concern on the proposed dam over the river Narmada. In Gujarat, several NGOs had been petitioning the state government and the World Bank to cover those getting affected indirectly by the construction of dam under the rehabilitation process. Early in 1986 in Maharashtra, an organization of displaced persons had acquired considerable visibility under the banner Narmada Dharangrast Sangharsh Samiti. Medha Patkar had worked in North Gujarat before relocating to the Narmada Valley with prominent social activists such as Bhanubhai Advaryu, Achyut Yagnik and Girishbhai Patel, and had seen the efforts to organize communities affected by large dams in places such as Shamalaji and Ukai. On 18th August 1988, several such formations working on the issue of social and ecological impacts of Narmada dams came together and resolved to announce their total but strictly non-violent opposition to the terminal Sardar Sarovar Dam and Narmada Sagar Dam. Almost a year after this, on 28 September 1989, at Harsud, a massive rally took place where several thousand affected people participated and debated the nature of development. Harsud Sammelan brought many social movements of India together and was a major milestone in formation of a nationwide coalition of people's movement in early 1990s called Jan Vikas Andolan. Parallel to this, there was an internationalization of the cause, and environmental movements in other parts of the world got to learn more about the Narmada controversy thanks to 2 trips by Medha Patkar to Washington in 1987 and 1989. Narrating about the events that unfolded on the international front, Patrick Macaulay states, and I quote, Lori Udall from Environment Defense Fund was inspired by Patkar to take the lead role in raising the NBS concern with the World Bank. Lori Udall also helped build a network of committed and informed activists in North America, Europe, Japan and Australia who became known as Narmada Action Committee. Unquote. Patrick Macaulay also tells us that Bruce Rich from Environment Defense Fund and Marcus Kolster of the UK-based Survival International both visited Narmada Valley before Patkar's first trip to the US and were the first to lobby actively against the World Bank support for the project. In March 1990, NBA had decided to petition government to suspend the construction pending a comprehensive and independent review. Later that year, in May 1990, NBA organized a protest in front of Prime Minister VP Singh's residence in New Delhi, which convinced Prime Minister to reconsider the project. The next big protest was a long march on feet starting from Rajghat Bridge on 25th December 1990 on Narmada River near Badwani in Madhya Pradesh, which resolved to reach the dam site and carry out non-violent demonstration to get the construction work on Sardar Sarovar Dam stopped. When the protesters reached a village named Pherkua, which marked Madhya Pradesh-Gujarat boundary, they were stopped by the armed policemen. An angry, month-long standoff ensued. In a non-violent protest action, NBA volunteers repeatedly sent teams of volunteers with their hands tied with a rope to face the barricade and face the violent police repression, reminding people of the days of Dandi Satyagraha. Medha Patkar and 6 others began fast, and on 29 January of 1991, the 21st day of the fast, came the news from Washington DC that the World Bank would institute an independent commission to review the project. On 1st September 1991, an independent review mission headed by Bradford Morse and Thomas Berger began to began the review process and submitted a voluminous report to the World Bank President on 18 June 1992. The independent review concludes that, and I quote, important assumptions on which the projects are based are now questionable or are known to be unfounded. Environmental and social trade-offs have been made and continue to be made without a full understanding of the consequences. As a result, benefits tend to be overstated while social and environmental costs are frequently understated. We have decided that it would be irresponsible for us to try to patch together a series of recommendations on implementation when the flaws in the project are as obvious as they appear to us. As a result, we think that wiser course would be for the World Bank to step back from the project and consider them afresh. The failure of the bank's incremental strategy should be acknowledged. Unquote. That has gone into the details of the social and ecological impacts that would be caused by Sardar Sarovar Dam. Following independent review, October 1992 meetings of the World Bank executive directors witnessed several directors calling for suspension of loans. However, majority voted to continue financing the project and authorized management to proceed with a 6-month action plan to address the environmental and social problems that were pointed out in the independent review. 6 months later, when the conditions of that patchwork action plan had not been fulfilled and it became crystal clear that World Bank will be forced to withdraw financing the dam, Government of India announced as a face-saving measure that it wished to cancel the remaining balance of the World Bank assistance. Away from the events unfolding in Washington DC and New Delhi, in the Narmada Valley, affected people had started to bear the brunt of continued construction work. NBA now announced that in the face of rising waters and imminent submergence, a committed group of activists will rather embrace drowning by water than move out. A series of violent repressive actions began to unfold, but the police couldn't locate Medha Patkar and her colleagues, who had declared that they would commit Jal Samarpan, that is drowning by water, on 4th August 1993. On the eve of that protest action, on August 5th, 1993, Union Water Resource Ministry appointed the 5-member group. However, project authorities soon whittled down the committee's mandate and pro-dam groups in Gujarat approached Gujarat High Court to set aside ministry's memorandum and restraining the government from releasing the report to the public. High Court passed an order in October 1993 which substantially restrained the government from releasing the report to the public. This was challenged in the Supreme Court, which eventually allowed the report to be made public in December 1994. In the meanwhile, in November 1993, project proponents announced an issue of high interest bearing deep discount bonds to raise rupees 300 crores through market borrowings. This bond had a long maturity period and at expiry of 20 years, they promised that investors would reap a huge benefit. This has meant that the government, the way they drew the funds from the market borrowings in 1993, was creating further unsustainable debt liabilities for the project. While the Supreme Court had first declined to stop the work on dam in May 1994, a year later in its order dated May 5th, 1995, it agreed for the suspension of the work and maintained this stand for nearly 4 years. In the interim order in February 1999, the Supreme Court allowed the height to be raised to 88 meters. But a year after, on October 18, 2000, came the final verdict. The Supreme Court gave a split verdict by 2 on a 3-bench judge by 2-1, with a majority and thereby operative judgment allowing the dam height to be raised to 138.64 meters, but in stages after ensuring compliance with Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal awards provisions for resettlement and compliance with the environmental issues as required under Ministry of Environment and Forest clearance conditions. Minority judgment that was penned by Honorable Justice S.P. Bharucha, however, asked project authorities to seek environment clearances afresh, while allowing the construction to proceed in the stages. The court had reposed a considerable amount of faith on a condition, an innocent-looking linguistic phrase called paripasam. Soon after the dam wall started rising, and 1.5 years later, project authorities clinched a clearance to raise the dam height from 90 to 95 meters on May 14, 2002, by inventing further linguistic tyranny due to an arbitrary distinction between temporarily and permanently affected that led to diminishing number of project affected families in Madhya Pradesh. Similarly, the dam height was raised to 100 meters and to 110.64 meters following a clearance in May 2003 and April 2004 respectively. On May 15, 2005, Supreme Court gave a judgment that was critical of the resettlement and rehabilitation process and reiterated the binding rehabilitation clauses of NWDTA by ruling that they have to rehabilitate quote-unquote temporarily affected project affected families, major sons and unmarried daughters also. The judgment also reiterated land for land rehabilitation and lamented the special rehabilitation package mechanism. A year later, on March 8, 2006, project authorities once again clinched the clearance to raise the dam height to 121.92 meters. Union Water Resource Minister immediately decided to review the decision. While this led to intense debate over the state of resettlement and rehabilitation, political expediencies put haze over the discourse. Although the construction stopped at 119 meters at the onset of monsoon, by December 2006, the dam height was again started to be raised and reached 121.92 meters. The 7-year period from 2007 to 2014 witnessed repeated efforts by project proponents, some of those even before they carried out inspection status of radial gates that were lying in stockyard at dam site for last 15 years to get the clearance to install the radial gates and raise the height of dam to 138.64 meters. However, it was only on June 2014, after the regime change, that Narmada Control Authority granted clearance to raise the dam height to the final 138.64 meter level by installing gates. Even as affected people have been arguing that rehabilitation of displaced persons remains far from over. In its 3 decades of existence, as an environmental and social movement, NBA has articulated the pertinent questions on the development and has forced powers that be to review the destructive development paradigm and urged for exploring alternatives. Concluding his narrative on the history of Narmada Bachao Andolan, Patrick McCulley states, and I quote, "The NBA sees its role as much more than challenging a single dam or even dam building in general. Medha Patkar and other NBA leaders have travelled throughout India supporting other struggles against destructive state and corporate development projects which strip the poor of the right to livelihood. Together with other leading environmental, women's, lower caste and Gandhian groups, the NBA has helped establish National Alliance of People's Movement. In March 1996, representatives from around 100 groups in 17 states drew up People's Resolve, a common ideological platform for the National Alliance of People's Movement, around which it is hoped India's many thousands of diverse people's organizations can unite in a strong social political force." Unquote. NBA continues to raise the violations in rehabilitation process by knocking the doors of courts through legal petitions today. In a recent judgment, Supreme Court of India has upheld the argument by NBA that and legal entitlements promised to major sons cannot be diluted by Madhya Pradesh state government. While in the submergence zone villages, communities keep the struggle, asserting the right to life and livelihood and willing to put up resistance against rising waters that have drowned their homes more than once during the monsoon. On the other side, governments have denotified land that were supposed to get irrigation water to industries. The progress on canal network has been such that Gujarat has repeatedly failed to optimally use the water that is stored behind the dam wall in Sardar Sarovar Reservoir. Recently, communities in immediate downstream of the controversial dam has also mobilized in protest against the proposed Garudeshwar Weir that is slated to submerge lands in 61 villages. Downstream communities have also sought justice from National Green Tribunal on the continued violation of environmental norms and has challenged the Statue of Unity project and other ecotourism proposals. The questions raised by Narmada Bachao Andolan will continue to haunt the development planning and will continue to work as magnifying glass for the development planners, showing them the words uttered by Gandhiji, appealing to behold the face of the last man while taking decisions. In October 2010, Delhi Solidarity Group, a formation that commits to stand in solidarity to contemporary social movements across India, published a book titled Plural Narratives from Narmada Valley. This book comprises narratives and oral history attempting to write the history of Narmada Bachao Andolan from the point of view of various activists in the form of long conversations. In the year 2015, Narmada Bachao Andolan published a calendar giving a snapshot history of the last 30 years of struggle, and an academician, Shiv Vishwanathan, found in that act an effort to speak memory to silence, conscience to indifference, and truth to the centrality of power. Thank you.